Morgen. And once again, I'd just like to remind all the ladies out there, I am available. When people think of slavery, they associate it with the United States. And they're absolutely right. Slavery was propagated, was perpetrated in the United States, but only from 1776 till the end of the Civil War in 1865. 89 years. Before 1776, there was no slavery in the United States because there was no United States. The United States did not exist before 1776. So who started slavery? And who perpetrated it and propagated it for 300 years? Since the people who lived in since those colonies in North America were under English rule, I guess you would have to conclude that it was the English who initiated it and propagated it for 300 years. Doesn't that make sense? And yet, when we talk about slavery, nobody brings up England. It's always the United States. And they're right. They're absolutely right. The United States did perpetrate slavery from the time of its inception in 1776. They're not lying, but as I said in a previous video, when you leave out a pertinent piece of information, that's just like lying, isn't it? Why does England get a free pass? Nobody talks about the 300 years of slavery perpetrated by England. 300 years versus 79 years. That's almost 4 times as long. England perpetrated slavery almost 4 times as long as the United States. For 300 years. From the early 1500s until the time they abolished it in something like the 1830s. The United States hasn't even existed yet for 300 years. You know, the US is only about 250 years old. So they haven't even existed for 300 years. Right? Do the math. Am I again, you've heard me say this before. You've heard me ask this question before. Am I talking out my ass here? Get out your calculator, bring up the calculator app on your phone or your iPad and do the math. England perpetrated slavery. England initiated, they started it in North America. They started it in the 1500s, right? There was no United States until 1776. So until then, it was all under English rule with the consent and probably encouragement of the English government. I mean, they were probably raking in tons of tax dollars because slavery was a business. The slave trade was a business, and businesses pay taxes to the government. So the English government must have making bucket loads full of tax dollars from the slave trade alone. They had no problem with slavery. All their kings and queens and dukes and whatever. Why doesn't anybody talk about the English involvement and the English propagation of slavery? They started it. There was no United States at that time. Right? Think about it. Is that fair? You know, why dump it all on the U.S.? And the U.S. certainly deserves its share of judgment for that. Definitely. But nobody mentions England, who perpetrated it for 4 times as long. And also, I think this is the way people think, or don't think, I should say. But in the U.S., slavery was abolished. We all know the history, the Civil War. The Civil War was fought over slavery, and at the end of the Civil War, when the northern states defeated the southern states, the Union defeated the Confederacy. In 1865, slavery was abolished, right? Well, in England, slavery was abolished, like I said, sometime in the 1830s. So about 30 years before the U.S. So because the English abolished slavery a whole 30 years before the United States did, again, they get a free pass, right? They get a get out of jail free card. Nobody judges them. Nobody talks about England. What's 30 years compared to 300 years, right? And yet, because England abolished slavery first, now they're like squeaky clean. Their hands are clean. Oh, we did it first. Yeah, we abolished slavery first. We abolished slavery 30 years before the United States did. Yeah, after you perpetrated it for 300 years. Does that make sense, people? Am I talking out my ass? Or does that seem a little unfair? 2 guys rob a bank. 2 guys rob 2 different banks. They both commit the same crime. And one guy is sentenced to, 20 years in prison. And the other guy is sentenced to 6 months. Is that fair? Does that make any sense? When people talk about slavery, they dump it all on the United States. And they're right. They're not lying. The United States did perpetrate slavery for 89 years. From 1776, when the U.S. was born, until 1865, when they abolished slavery. Whereas England, who actually started slavery, initiated this whole criminal enterprise in the 1500s, and they abolished it in the 1800s, so that's 300 years. And nobody talks about them. Nobody talks about the English involvement in slavery. What? Isn't it bizarre? It's like some people in this world seem to have I guess you could call it a guardian demon. You have guardian angels, I guess, for the good people. Well, not sure about that. But there seems to be guardian demons, I mean, look at Donald Trump. He's back in the news. Well, he's always in the news. He never left the news. He was always there. But look at all the things that guy's done. It's like he has a get out of jail free card. I mean, that guy's got his own guardian demon. Weird, right? Is there any justice? There doesn't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be. Yeah. And that's just one thing the English did. You know, the first people they fucked were their own neighbors. They fucked the Scottish, they fucked the Irish, and they got away with it. And then they turned their eyes to the rest of the world and said, well, it worked here, so we'll go around fucking everybody else, you know? And they did. I mean, if you haven't seen that movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson, I recommend it. It's a true story, based on, true story. But what they did to that guy, he was a Scottish rebel who fought the English, fought for his country and his people's freedom. He was finally captured and executed by the English. And that wasn't good enough for them. They chopped his body into pieces and sent one piece to the eastern end of the empire, one part to the western end of the empire, one to the north, one to the south, to basically terrorize people into, like, don't try this, right? Don't try this. Don't do what this guy did, right? Stay in line. Stay in line. Bow to your king, your queen, whatever, and don't you dare, think about standing up for yourself or your rights or your freedoms. Yeah, that's what they did to the guy. They desecrated, I mean, it's not enough that they defeated him and captured him. They desecrated his body. I don't want to rag too much on the English, because if I do, this video will probably get pulled. But I could mention a slew of other things. Just look at your history. The burnings at the stake of the Protestant reformers, Bloody Mary, King Henry VIII's daughter, Mary the First, Mary Tudor, Queen of England. She had 300 Protestants burned at the stake. Yeah, that was Bloody Mary. And yet the English have this reputation of being the most civilized people on earth. With their tea, and their royalty, and the fact that they wear trousers, right? They don't wear saris, or loincloths or kilts, like the savages do, right? They wear trousers. Incredible. I've noticed, I mentioned before, I live just outside Toronto, and when I go to downtown Toronto, even here, I think in Brampton, down at City Hall, but anywhere in Canada you go, even Toronto, the important places like City Hall, the government buildings, the war memorials. Of course, you see the Canadian flag, but right next to it is always the British flag, right? Why? Why is that? Do they fly the Canadian flag over the British Parliament in London? I've seen pictures. I didn't see the Canadian flag. Wherever you live, are they flying the Venezuelan flag? If you live in the United States and you're watching this, or in Canada, do you see the Venezuelan flag, flying in your country, or the the Swedish flag? Why do I have the the English flag flying in my country? We're not a colony anymore. We're an independent nation. So what the fuck? Englanders, get off my back. I know there are many Canadians who would like to go back to the days of the kings and queens. If you do, I recommend why don't you just build a time, if you're such geniuses, you know, if you're such a genius, why don't you build a time machine and just screw, okay? Because this is the 21st century. Those days are over, you know. Sad to say, those days are over, okay? And they're not coming back. Yeah. What are you trying to prove? In conclusion, I just have one thing to say.